Way back in 2013, Sony released the PlayStation 4, and in the years since, they've seen sales for the console skyrocket to, as of July 2018, more than 82 million units. These unbelievable sales figures can be due to many factors, but one major reason has to be the list of incredible exclusive first-party games that they pumped out through the last 5 years, and the ones on the horizon. Back at the start of this generation, Sony released the console with 2 exclusives. The first was an attempt at a new mascot for the PlayStation brand with a 3D platformer in the vein of Jak and Daxter and Ratchet and Clank.
What is he doing?
Although it critically bombed, sales were quite good, and it even managed to get a sequel for people who wanted to see Knack save the world again. In stark contrast to Knack, the team at Guerrilla released their 4th Killzone game with Shadowfall. Splitting opinions, some loved and some hated it. The game followed on the conflict between the Vectans and the Helghast, with more open-ended levels and a higher focus on stealth than the first 3 games in the franchise. Being on the new hardware, the game was graphically stunning and the levels were large with many ways to complete objectives. Going on to 2014, there were 4 major releases for Sony, starting with infamous Second Son. Being the 3rd game in the superhero open world franchise and the first on the new hardware, a new city was chosen. Seattle would be the background and players will control Delsin, a 24-year-old graffiti artist who can absorb conduit powers. He faces off against the DUP and their leader Augustine, who controls concrete. As good as Seattle looked and how well lived in the city felt, both critics and players said the game didn't live up to their highs of the previous 2 games. This would prove to be the last game in the franchise, although a fine game, this still wasn't the PS4's killer app.
You could have hit me!
Later on in the year, the PS3's best game came over to the PS4, and all of a sudden the console had its first masterpiece. Following the story of Joel and Ellie's journey through a world ravaged by the fungal infection that has turned people into zombie-like infected, the world was treated to the amazing storytelling, music, performances, and world that Naughty Dog created in The Last of Us.
So don't tell me that I would be safer with someone else, because the truth is I would just be more scared.
You're right.
With improved graphics and the use of the newer controller. This was a must-own for anyone with a PS4. Finally, we were treated to the long-delayed and overhyped Driveclub, promising an online component where players could form clubs and work their way up to become the biggest and best club in the world. Although the visuals were impressive and car handling worked very well, the crash physics and single player came under heavy criticism, and players just didn't get behind the online modes enough to save Evolution Studios from eventually closing down. / 2015 started on another dull note with the release of the Order 1886, a Victorian-age steampunk third-person shooter with a serious amount of hype behind it due to the amazing trailers and unique setting. Unfortunately, as good as the game looked, and it really was a technical marvel by the way, the player didn't have much in the way of interaction, and the story was unbelievably short. This led to some very mixed reactions and questions about when Sony would actually come up with something with the quality of the PS3 exclusives.
Everything to your liking thus far?
Quite. Just another ordinary London morning.
Indeed.
Step up from Software and Bloodborne. This third-person action role-playing game is created in the same vein as the Souls franchise of games and thus extremely difficult. This, however, is what brought players in, as getting through the game feels like a genuine accomplishment. Bloodborne was greeted by incredible review scores and players loved it. Playing as the hunter, you are tasked with stopping the source of a plague that has struck the Gothic city of Yharnam by defeating many of its inhabitants that have been turned into bestial creatures. Carrying on with the dark theme of 2015's games, Until Dawn was released by Supermassive Games. This is a bit of a sleeper hit, with review scores and player reactions being incredibly positive. The game being effectively a horror movie where every character can die or be saved depending on what the player decides to do during the game, whether that be interacting with certain objects or decisions made in conversations. With the game taking the Telltale mold of storytelling but adding in a much more realistic art direction, Until Dawn is seen as a genre-defining game and further proof that the PlayStation is the place for a great story.
Well, then sit down, wary criminal, and I'll tell you a story. It all started with a hapless lombax named Ratchet.
Going into 2016, Sony was really in need of some more top-tier exclusives, and this was finally the year they would start to deliver. Coming up first was a remake of the original Ratchet and Clank. Rebuilt from the ground up and actually based on the movie that was based on the original game, it was surprisingly incredible. In an era where 3D platformers were looking obsolete, Insomniac Games wowed critics and players in creating a genuinely fun, funny and stunning game. It looks just like a Pixar movie. Ratchet and Clank showed that the genre is still alive and relevant, and is also perhaps what Knack should have been.
After all, you may not have this chiseled jaw or godlike pectoral region, but if you have heart, then you have what it takes. You don't have what it takes.
But I have heart.
Yes, but unfortunately that heart is encased in a weak, muscleless mass of inexperience. Plus there's your history to consider.
Next up was the most anticipated game of the year, and wow did Naughty Dog deliver. Uncharted 4: A Thief's End was the culmination of an incredible story of Nathan Drake and his treasure hunting exploits. Taking what they learnt from The Last of Us, this game focused more on the story of Nate, his brother, wife and best friend than it did on the huge set pieces of the other three in the series. Not to say they weren't there, but they're slightly more reined in and feel more organic to the story and world that Naughty Dog created. With Uncharted 4, Sony finally had the killer app for the system, and at the time, probably the best game of the generation so far.
Sully?
Know what I love about partying with a bunch of crooks?
What's that?
Nobody cares if you smoke indoors.
It's been a while.
Too long, boyo.
Coming to the end of the year and one of the largest controversies in games development. The Last Guardian, made by Gen Design, formerly Team Ico, took almost 10 years to make due to numerous delays and rumours the game would never see the light of day. Finally coming out, The Last Guardian gained praise for the look of the game, story and sound design. However, the fact that this was the first game the team had released since Shadow of the Colossus back in 2005 on the PS2, the gameplay and controls were seen as dated and really let the game down. Ultimately, The Last Guardian failed to live up to its predecessors, and showed games can't take 10 years to make because the industry moves too quickly. In 2016, Killzone developer Guerrilla Games shocked the world by releasing Horizon Zero Dawn. Following Aloy in a future where robotic dinosaurs roam free and people worship technology, players fight through this open world using a bow and arrow against these incredible looking machines, all whilst trying to uncover the mysteries of the high-tech civilization that came before, and was taken down by their creations. Releasing to critical acclaim and praised by players for its unique setting and story, this game shows what Guerrilla Games can really do, and shows they have outgrown the Killzone franchise. This also gives Sony an open world game to add to its ever-growing repertoire of gaming experiences.
Ready yet, Knack?
Any reason why you brought me here for our Sunday hike?
Yeah, but if I tell you, it'll ruin the surprise.
Ooh, well, I wouldn't want that to happen.
Seriously, Knack, kick it into gear.
I'm just happy I get to spend some time with my favorite nephew.
Don't you mean your only nephew?
Well, that too.
Come on, Knack.
It's about time. Let's get this day started.
Following on from the highs of Horizon, Knack 2 was released. A sequel to the PS4 launch title, Knack 2 is widely seen as an improvement on its predecessor. However, this didn't stop it from getting some very mixed reviews and poor sales. Following on from the original, players once again took control of Knack, collecting relics and beating up goblins to save the world. Unfortunately, after Ratchet and Clank the year before, this was seen as a step backward to 3D platformers and completely failed to impress, to the point that we're not expected to see a third game in the franchise. Finally, in 2017, Sony's juggernaut racing franchise returned with Gran Turismo Sport. Also supporting VR, this game has an emphasis on online competitive racing and motorsports in general, taking out the small hatchback and regular everyday cars and replacing them with just hardcore racing cars. This is a stripped-back but streamlined experience compared to older games in the franchise. Releasing to critical praise and good sales, the online component proved to be very popular, and playing the game in VR enhanced the experience even further. The problem was the lack of choice when compared to previous games, and Microsoft's Forza 7, making this not seen as a full release in the franchise and has left gamers waiting for Gran Turismo 7 even more.
Elbow up, steady hand, relax. Accuracy over speed. Yes!
Do not lose it.
Coming into 2018, the hotly anticipated God of War was released. After some incredible looking trailers and gameplay demos, players around the world were excited for the latest chapter in Kratos' story.
Hang on, boy!
Nothing could have prepared anyone for just how good this game was.
What is this?
It's the World Serpent.
During the story, Kratos now has a son and has traded Greek for Danish mythology and features some of the best boss fights in all of gaming. On top of this, the game features a unique camera that doesn't cut throughout the whole story, even using the same camera for cutscenes and getting rid of loading screens completely. Being branded as a masterpiece and a generation-defining game.
He doesn't know, does he? About your true nature? Or his own?
That is none of your concern.
The gods of these realms don't take kindly to outsiders, trust me. I know.
God of War was so monumental that some have even started saying that this is a new era of gaming because of it, and that Sony Santa Monica's creation is the benchmark at which all games will now be judged against.
We're coming to you live from Detroit, where thousands of androids are marching through the city at this very moment. The leader of the Deviants, the one they call Marcus, is at the head of the march.
Something's happening in Detroit, Madam President.
Following on from the wild success of God of War, Quantic Dream finally released Detroit Become Human, a game they teased with a tech demo called Kara years before. Featuring a trademark Quantic Dream story and outstanding graphical quality, the game follows three androids, Kara, Connor and Marcus, in their journey to become free and the impact this has on the larger world. Another masterclass in graphical design, this game is simply stunning and garnered positive reviews from critics and players. The only problem was that this came out so close to God of War and thus is generally seen as being an inferior game. The story was also seen to have some plot holes and at times poor pacing. Even with these problems, Detroit sold well and is seen by many as a solid entry into the PS4's library.
We don't want confrontation. We are protesting peacefully.
I repeat, surrender now, or we will open fire!
There's no turning back now.
Moving on, we get to the most recent release with Marvel's Spider-Man made by Insomniac Games. A very risky IP to take on due to all Spider-Man games still being compared to 2004's Spider-Man 2 on the PlayStation 2. Luckily for them, the game excelled and even surpassed the aforementioned PS2 title, with critics and players loving New York as a playground for the superhero caper and traversing the Big Apple being an absolute joy. The story involved many of Spider-Man's greatest villains, with twists and turns in the story to keep you guessing. The combat involved using timing and combos to take down waves of enemies, all whilst hearing Peter Parker use brilliant one-liners and the many details the game throws at you.
Love seeing you two together again. You always were my favorites.
Going into the future, there's still a few games to come out for Sony's current console, with Days Gone and Dreams hopefully coming out in 2019. Looking further forward, Kojima Productions are making Death Stranding, which is still raising many questions about what it even is, but so far the trailers have looked interesting enough that it's starting to look like a very unique game with a very strange story. Finally, Naughty Dog are busy working on The Last of Us Part 2, with Ellie taking centre stage this time and the story focusing on her latest journey. So far, the trailers and gameplay footage look incredible, and I for one can't wait to see what this game will bring to the incredible story of the first, and will hopefully be a perfect end to the PS4's life cycle.
What are you doing, kiddo? You really gonna go through with this?
I'm gonna find, and I'm gonna kill every